Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. U.S. President Donald Trump has increased sanctions on Iran since returning to office as part of his maximum pressure strategy to prevent the Islamic Republic from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Trump has been calling for negotiations with Iran to reach a new, more robust nuclear deal, saying recently that reports of potential U.S.-Israeli military action against Iran are, quote, exaggerated. However, there have been reports that an Israeli strike on Iran could occur this year. And Al Monitor's own Ben Caspit reported last week that U.S. and Israeli officials have reached an understanding on steps to take if Iran does not agree to a new deal. Also of note is that the U.S. authorized 2 flights of B-52 bombers over the Middle East last week. Iranian officials have rebuffed Trump's offers for talks so far, slamming the president over the sanctions. And Iran maintains its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Our guest this week is Al Monitor Pentagon correspondent Jared Szuba. Jared takes us through the Trump administration's strategic thinking on Iran, as well as what Israel wants to see happen on the issue. Hope you enjoy. Jared, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Jared, my first question is about the new administration. What's your read on the Trump administration's approach to Iran? And is the call from Trump for negotiations towards a new deal sincere? Or are we moving more towards a military confrontation over their nuclear program?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Trump administration's calls for negotiations with Iran are sincere. I think it's been clear for some time that both sides, dating back to the prior Biden administration, of course, even to the beginning of its term, and more recently, the Iranians have been eager to get something to the table. The Iranians are suffering significantly from a major economic downturn. From Washington's perspective, I mean, the way Trump seems to see it is that there are essentially 2 options. One is getting the Iranians to the table to negotiate and seal a broader and more restrictive nuclear deal. The 2015 JCPOA, the objections against that deal, from the Saudis, from the Israelis, and from many here in Washington, was that it didn't go far enough in restricting Iran's conventional weapons, ballistic missiles, PGM kits, and arming and training and funding of a bulwark of militias across the region. So that's what the Trump administration is going to be looking to do. The alternative, I think, as the Trump administration sees it, is some sort of armed conflict with Iran. That could come either if the U.S. assists the Israeli military in launching sort of long-range heavy airstrikes in a hopes of sufficiently damaging Iran's nuclear facilities. But there's, of course, no guarantee of successfully ending Iran's enrichment program. And, as U.S. generals have long feared, in contrast to their Israeli counterparts, that could actually encourage Iran to use any remaining uranium to actually pursue a bomb, even though that has not been the policy up until this time. The alternative, of course, to some, under that rubric would be Israel tries to go it alone, launches airstrikes within Iran in an attempt to, damage their nuclear enrichment stockpiles. But I think it's well known that Israel's military, and we can chat more about this later, doesn't quite have the capabilities necessary to do that. That would essentially force the United States to come in, U.S. military and Air Force to come in, clean the whole thing up, so to speak, by finishing off what remains of Iranian nuclear sites. At which point, much of the fissile material may have already been moved. That is absolutely not something that the Trump administration wants to see. President Trump has staked his legacy on being a peacemaker, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is not likely to squander what remains of his goodwill with President Trump at this time. I think the real question is, what will Iran do? Hezbollah was Iran's main strategic deterrent, and that's now gone effectively, at least in any semblance of what it was prior to the Israeli war in Lebanon, as is the IRGC's forward presence in Syria, which has evacuated since the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime. So the primary forward deterrent of the Islamic Republic is that remains is its nuclear threshold status. And the U.S. and Israel have already publicly laid out approaching 90% enrichment, weapons-grade enrichment of uranium is a red line that would trigger a military kinetic response to end the enrichment program, hopefully. I think it's worth reminding that, that both the US and Iran want talks, but the question is how much of the remaining proxy bulwark would Iran be willing to compromise on? It has extensive support for militias like Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. How much would Iran be willing to reel that in and impose limits on that? And for how long? And on the other hand, the other question for the United States going into negotiations with Iran will be, how do you get Netanyahu's right-wing coalition partners to be satisfied with whatever concessions the Iranians make so that a deal can be made? I think it's asking quite a lot of the Israeli right wing to accept both a nuclear deal with Iran and then, on the other hand, as part of the Abraham Accords expansion, some sort of statehood for the Palestinians. So the Trump administration is going to need to come up with some very serious concessions, most likely to the Israeli right wing, political right wing. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Jared after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. That's actually a good transition to the next question. What do you think Israel wants from the Trump administration with regards to Iran, and how close are they to getting that?
Well, Israel's military for a long time, and off and on, Prime Minister Netanyahu's governments have wanted the U.S. to essentially end the Iranian leadership's will and or their capability to generate or obtain a nuclear weapon. That is also the stated U.S. policy, that Iran will not obtain a nuclear weapon. The question is how to do that, right? And so the Israeli officials have for a long time argued, to their American counterparts, that they can pull off with U.S. support, long-range airstrikes, similar to the bombing of Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor in the 1980s. And they can set the Iranian enrichment program so severely that essentially Iran's leadership will lose the will to ever try that again. Now, the daylight with the Americans has long been, as mentioned, that might actually encourage the Iranians to go for a bomb using whatever material survives. As I'm sure you know, Iran's nuclear sites, key nuclear sites, are buried very deep underground, very fortified. Israel can't undertake these strikes in a way that would sufficiently or be seen as sufficiently damaging these facilities alone. They don't have the GBU-43 Moab mega bomb that the United States has. They certainly don't have a way to deliver the bomb. The U.S. would have to deliver them with B-2s. So, and they probably don't have the density of fighter escorts that they would need to get through what, if anything, remains of Iranian air defenses and air defenders, the aircraft they would scramble. Keep in mind, Iran has been in talks for some time with Russia about obtaining Sukhoi 35s. On top of that, they don't have sufficient refueling tankers to keep their aircraft afloat for a long enough time over Iran, over those long distances from Israel, in the time it would take, for the duration it would take to destroy these sites. So this would be, for the U.S. to support such an operation, would be a significant commitment of valuable U.S. military forces to the region. And of course, as mentioned, senior U.S. generals have worried for a long time this could turn into an open-ended engagement. The reason for that is because Iran still possesses a fairly significant arsenal. It's not clear publicly how much remains after this past conflict in the region, but a fairly significant arsenal of precision-guided ballistic missiles, drones, and the U.S. has military bases all throughout the Persian Gulf and up in Jordan and in Syria and Iraq. Iran could very feasibly, and has in the past, for actually the Trump administration's assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC Quds Force commander, in 2020, they have retaliated by firing ballistic missiles at U.S. bases in the region. If the U.S. were to assist an Israeli air campaign and essentially carry the weight of, no pun intended, the Israeli air campaign against Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities and this you could see significant and would likely see significant Iranian retaliation, which would mean the U.S. Air Force would essentially have to preempt that, which would be very, very difficult. And any ballistic missiles that get through would likely land at U.S. bases anywhere from Iraq to Syria, potentially even Al Udeid Air Force Base, Prince Sultan Air Force Base, meaning that if the conflict went on and became escalated to that degree, that you would be seeing, potentially U.S. bases in the Gulf, Saudi, UAE, maybe even Qatar, being hit with ballistic missiles, which don't have the same density of air defenses that other U.S. bases in the world have. And you can only imagine if things got to that level. It's hard to imagine, but it's not impossible. What that would do to U.S. ties with key partners in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. This is not a president who wants to involve or commit the U.S. military into an open-ended Middle East engagement that could destroy U.S. strategic relations with the Persian Gulf countries, the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf region. Despite what the Israelis think about such an operation, there is and has long been over multiple administrations a lot of skepticism about the end game with such a move. But it's also stated policy of the United States that that is on the table if Iran continues to pursue this enrichment and specifically weaponization as well.
And just one follow-up. Why does Israel lack the military capabilities to carry out a significant strike on its own? Is this something the U.S. doesn't want them to have, or what's the story behind that?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few years ago, I think it was, don't quote me on this, I think it was 2020. There was a deal signed to provide Israel with KC-46 refueling tankers. That has taken quite a bit of time. I'll have to go back and check the expected completion dates of that arrangement. But the Israeli Air Force is by far the most sophisticated in the region, but it hasn't needed to rely on long-range heavy strikes. Its biggest enemies have been insurgent organizations in dense urban areas within a stone's throw of its borders in the past several decades. And so it's relied on very different aerial tactics than the ones that would be needed in such an operation against Natanz, Fordo, other facilities. So they haven't invested in those. They're trying to. They've sought now a third F-35 squadron from the United States, which that deal is in the works. They train regularly with the U.S. You saw, I think it was the past few years, there have been two publicly made known exercises in which the U.S. Air Force and Navy, actually, as well as the Israeli Air Force, they teamed up and they essentially practiced these sorts of long-range airstrikes in a manner that's very similar to the formation and the techniques and tactics that would be required for this. The Pentagon was sort of, oh, we're not focusing on any, enemy. We're not pretending to bomb Iran. This isn't some mock simulation for, going to war with Iran. But of course it was, honestly. And folks will tell you that behind closed doors, that this is a signal that the Iranians were supposed to receive and certainly did, that if they continue along this enrichment path, this would be the end game for their program.
Jared, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your reporting on these issues.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.